Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we've got the door shut again with the dog outside, so we're going to have dog jump in at the door. Again, we've apparently learned to associate personal time with Greg as playtime with Ball, so she has to be outside or otherwise we get the squeak ball. So anyway though, today we're going to talk about Stellaris. I figure why not, I've played a fair amount of Stellaris lately. It was sent to me as a gift a long while ago, and I didn't really play it. This kind of happens whenever people send me video game gifts. I kind of get around to them very late, and then I sort of get into them. And with grand strategy games and real-time strategy, I tend to like to pick them apart and figure out how they work. I kind of get really into the meta, and if the game has a lot of different things that you can do, then I'll play it for a lot longer. But if the mechanics are fairly shallow and I pick it up really quick, then I tend to drop it really fast. And so like I really like Civ 4. I really enjoyed all the things that you could do with Civ 4. It took me a while to kind of learn the mechanics and get everything going. And then really hated Civ 5 because there's a thing going on where, video games are getting more and more expensive and they really can't make games for niche markets anymore. Niche markets, whatever, however the word is pronounced. They can't make things for small markets anymore. So those people who really like those like high technical games, they're very enthusiastic about, oh, look at all these little moving parts. I can't wait to learn how they all work. Those people are not super common. What you get more are people who are, like shooters are really quick to pick up. They all function basically the same. Hold shift to run, right mouse button to zoom, point to click. It's point and click, and Yahtzee made a joke that I really like. It's a point and click adventure game where the answer to every question is use gun on man, So yeah, those are easy, like everyone can play those, and so like shooters were super mainstream, especially around when the PS3 came out, and they were kind of grappling with prices and how to do things and this and that. And the RTS genre, and perhaps also the grand strategy genre, maybe to a lesser extent, has kind of died off because they can't make these super expensive games and then sell them to everyone. Like, a lot of people don't really like them. So, for game night, it would be one of those things, like, it'd be like, oh, let's play any number of RTS games, and everyone would always be like, oh, no, I don't really want to do that. And the trouble is that because I'd get really into those games and really care about the mechanics, I'd get really good at them, and then, you'd have people who'd come in and they, don't spend a lot of time on the games, and, you could mop the floor with them, so you'd have to wind up trying to like handicap yourself and doing a lot of things. So there's a lot of barriers to getting into games, especially strategy games. And Stellaris is one that happens to be a little bit easier to get into. It's a bit more simple, but right now it's designed in a way that's kind of nice because there's a lot of different playstyles that sort of work, and there's some sort of riskiness to that. There's some pros and there's some cons. And they're still developing it. They're still releasing DLC for Stellaris. So, I don't know how it's going to be on into the future, but it's got some big flaws currently that they're trying to address. But if you're not familiar with Stellaris, Stellaris is a grand strategy game, which is to say that basically you're growing an empire over the span of however much game time. And you're supposed to pour hours and hours and hours into the game to build up your empire. And if you're not good at the games, you put all this time in only to have your empire devoured and toppled by something bigger than you. Big fish eats the little fish. That's how these games always work. And like I say, one of the things that I see, people hate loss more than they hate anything, and that's why a lot of people get stressed out by RTS games because you get harassed and this and that. And so in a lot of these grand strategy games, I tend to find that when you play with friends, you need to make a rule that you don't attack human players, because then everyone gets really upset. They lose the city, and it is just the most emotional thing. Everyone is having a bad time after that, so don't go to war with each other. Stellaris is neat because your galactic empire has the option to vassalize other countries, which is just to say that they become under your control. They're considered part of your empire, but they're still fully autonomous, and the only drawback, I think, is that they give you some of their resources and like a quarter of their fleet size. So you get a larger fleet from owning them, but otherwise they get to be their own country. So you don't actually have to kill your friends. You go to war, and even if you bomb their planets into oblivion, they still own the planets after the war. So you conquer the planets. It's got kind of a neat war system. You conquer planets basically, like you go in, you conquer planets, and when I say neat, I mean incredibly dull, but ingenious for playing friendly games with friends. So you go in, you conquer these planets, and currently the way it works, they're changing it, but currently the way it works is you send a great big fleet in, and you bombard the planet with your fleet, and there's different types of bombardment options. You can do, like, hold back, don't bomb the civilians, or you can do full-scale bombardment and just annihilate people. And anyway, regardless, your objective is to reduce the fortifications of the planet down to nothing, and then send in an army, and the army just kills everyone on the planet. There's no way to defend your planet, basically. I mean, there are, but it's pointless, and it's all like late-game tech, and it's just don't even worry about it. Don't worry about defending your planet. It's actually much more economical to not have any military presence on your planet at all, except for to attack with. Attack is functional, defense is worthless. So, yeah, the enemy virtually never is able to defend. Armies are a huge waste of money. And, so you just take over the planet. And then what it does is it says that you have, conquered the planet, but you don't actually own the planet. So when you conquer the planet, it's not able to produce any resources. You fundamentally cut it off from your opponent, but it doesn't get folded into your empire. This differs from the way that civilization works, where civilization, you'd go to war, and when you conquered the city, that city belonged to you. Like, it just became your city. So if you wanted to vassalize someone through warfare, you might have to go to war and then take a couple of their cities, and then you just held their cities, and it was up to you to give up those cities back to the person that you conquered. And the trouble there was that, when you vassalized someone, they really weren't held back very much, and so if you just gave them back all their holdings, there was a potential chance for them to rise up, and then they would have the same production capacity as you, and they could throw off their shackles and overcome you. With Stellaris, though, like I say, you don't really conquer a planet. You just sort of, it's just sort of like yours until the war is over. And then the enemy can negotiate, and they can agree to give a planet to you if that's what you asked for. But if you had other war demands, they can meet those, and if the war score is sufficient, then they can just agree to make peace and say, well, all right, here's your demands. So you just hold the planets, and then at the end of the war, if you say, well, I want you to be my vassal, then they become your vassal, they get all their planets back, and then you go back to playing the game the way that you were before, just with these minor penalties to this 25% penalty to fleet capacity and so forth. So yeah, much better suited for friendly play. Your friends might get mad, if you vassalize them, but on the bright side, they're still in it, and because they're part of your empire, you now kind of win as a team, even if it's a sort of hostile takeover style team. So some benefits there, some things that I kind of like. We always I haven't really gone to war with my friends very much. We all the thing about being friends is that in those games, a lot of times, the human players are far more trustworthy and far more friendly than the AI. The AI is always out to get you. So it tends to be that there's usually enough AI that the humans all sort of work together and stomp the AI into the ground. And, it's way faster and way more efficient to tackle the AI. Attacking humans is risky. People are smart. AI's dumb. So, you may as well hunt rabbits than battle with other wolves. It's a lot better strategy. So, yes. Anyway, though, so Stellaris, the premise of the game is that you're a little space empire, and you're just now spacefaring, and your objective is to spread out and become space. Just all of the space. You will become the space. And along the way, you run into these other little galactic empires that pop up, and they all have their own little, they're their own species. They have their own portraits and everything else, and they all have these governing ethics and things like that make them what they are. And I really kind of like it. It's sort of charming because you get a lot of control over designing your empire. And like I say, the game is fairly simple and streamlined once you start playing, but you get a lot of different options to change the way things work and to sort of suit your playstyle. So at the very start, you get to choose your race, and you start with their appearance and everything else like that. You give them a name, you write them up a bio. You can play as, for example, killbots, robots that are programmed to kill. Go off and fight Zap Brannigan off in the galaxy. And so you get to choose what the killbots look like. You get to name them things. I am fond of File Not Found. And you get to name what your ship prefixes are going to be. So it's like the ISS whatever. I like to name those the 404 whatever, and then they assign random names to your ship. So it's like 404, File Not Found. File Not Found. Just computer jokes. And then I would rename the entire galaxy File Not Found. We would just conquer planet after planet after planet and then forget what it was called. So you get to kind of play these roles with everything. And what is interesting mechanically, though, is that as you are done with all the cosmetic stuff, you get down into like your government. And the governments do a lot of different things. Like certain governments allow slavery, some governments are better at military. There's also pacifistic governments, which I have not touched yet. I just, I don't know, too many years of Civilization 4, I just recoil at the thought of playing a pacifistic nation. Like, who would even dream of not expanding through military conquest? What is the point? But Stellaris has stuff in place to allow you to play passively. It's not the ideal way to play, but there are a lot of people who play these games and they don't like to take risks. They don't like the idea of jockeying for land and control. So what Stellaris has done is in the base game you don't have this, but later on they get what are called Ascension Perks. So as you're playing along, if you have a lot of Unity, then Unity builds up into these bonuses for your empire, and when you collect enough of these bonuses, you get an Ascension Perk. And Ascension Perks do all kinds of different things. One of them is that it like massively increases your military size. So if you're just a tiny little pacifistic empire doing nothing and hurting nobody, then there's a bunch of bonuses to your Unity, because you're just a tiny concentrated little empire, and so everyone agrees that, this is our nation, we are Vatican City, we are Monte Carlo, and we are the most important nation ever. And, everyone agrees. Everybody agrees. So your Unity builds up, and then sooner or later, completely out of the blue, with the click of a button, Vatican City goes from having, the Vatican, the Papal Guard, or whatever, to suddenly having a military on par with, like, the United States. Click of a button, poof, suddenly your naval capacity explodes. There's a drawback in the fact that the tiny little nation usually doesn't have enough money to build anything, but the fact is that you could build that massive military if you wanted to. You got the Ascension perk that allows it, and of course there's all the other perks that you get as well. So through these kind of Ascension perks, like I say, while not ideal because you're still held back by your production capacity, the game allows an incredibly passive player to remain relevant and on somewhat reasonable footing compared to everybody else. The other thing you get for being very small and very passive is a bunch of research boosts. So if you invest a lot into Unity and research, again, you really won't have much production, which is unsafe, but you'll have a ton of technology, and you might be able to take off and wind up with like really high-powered weaponry well before everybody else, which staves off your imminent destruction a lot longer. I think a one planet challenge is fairly difficult and fairly inefficient. I believe that one of the more efficient ones they find is like 4 planets. But technology is sort of weird in this game. The way that technology works is every time you take a planet and every time you develop a new population, everyone gets a little bit dumber. You notice they do the same thing in like Civ 5, and actually a lot of grand strategy games kind of get like this, but that's only because otherwise size would be so dominant that, there'd be nothing that you could do to stop it. But unlike Civ 5, like I really hated the way that Civ 5 worked, where everything was tied to population, and then population was tied to happiness, and every time you built a new city, you became less happy, and every time you got a new pop, you became less happy. The reason I hated that is because it created kind of a stupid system, where in a lot of competitive online multiplayer, you'd find many people who were playing with the most exploitative, unbalanced nation, and that was how they went, and they would just like go through in the early game, and before you ever hit the the industrial era, the game would be over because everyone would be dead. It would just be like non-stop warfare or whatever, and they would just play nations that could get ahead without really investing much into their infrastructure because of whatever stupid bonus they had. And that was really kind of frustrating. And then if you played passively with friends, I found like the Aztecs were one of the strongest nations because of the way that they tied everything to population. One thing I used to do was like the Aztecs, they got these growth bonuses to their population, so I play like the Tradition Civic, and that made it to where population in your capital gave you like half the unhappiness as normal, and so like every city that I had would just be sending food to the capital, and I would have like the religion that made you grow faster population, and pretty soon it would be funny by the end of those games where like everyone agrees not to attack each other, they'd be looking to be like, oh my god, Greg has 90% of the world's population in his capital. like what happened? Like what? And I would be like so far ahead in technology because every one pop was worth like 1 point of tech. And so like if I have 90% of the world's population, then I'm also producing 90% of the world's technology. So it was kind of like I don't know, it was just really stupid. In Civ 5, when you learned to game its mechanics, all of its mechanics were incredibly meta, incredibly stupid. There were a few playstyles that were just absolutely dominant, and you could say that there was some complexity there, and maybe there kind of was, like, on the most nuanced ways. But overall, like, your grand strategy kind of was just, like, it was pretty stale. There wasn't very much you could do with it. So, Stellaris, kind of, I worry about it because as they're talking about changing things, one of the things that they have that's really terrible is military engagements kind of suck. You will have to build a military no matter what, because if you don't have a sufficiently large military, you'll be attacked by people with different governing civics than you. Like, for example, if you're a very materialistic empire, which means that you're faster at research, you might be attacked by an empire that is very religious, and religious empires tend to produce more unity. So, religious empires, religious AI will hate you, whereas materialistic empires, religious empires hate materialistic empires. I also like to play as a slaver nation a lot, and for whatever reason, everyone seems to find that unethical, and the AI tends to really dislike that. I mean, they don't, like, hate it as much as they hate me being the opposite of their ethics, but, they do. Everyone seems to kind of dislike it. They're all just like, oh, slaver empire, that's bad. But in fairness, slaves are really efficient for whatever reason, so if I want lots of minerals, all I need is lots of slaves. It's a great system, okay? So yes, you need your military because everyone else will attack you in this game. But the problem that they're facing currently, and that I think that they're trying to fix in February, is that military in this game is really stupid and really boring. You just build up your giant death blob of starships, and then you go and you send it to attack an enemy nation or defend or whatever. And the way that you travel around the galaxy is you have to come to, like, the edge of a solar system, and then it takes you, like, a month to transport however it is that you transport. And there's different choices. There's, like, warp engines, there's warp lanes, and then there's wormholes. And, like, wormholes are generally seen as one of the most efficient ways of traveling because you can get a great deal of range anywhere in the galaxy, but they all kind of work differently. The warp travel is like the basic beginner thing, where basically you just click and your guys go. Like, if there's an adjacent galaxy, they can just go to it, and they have a certain radius that they can travel in. It's smaller than wormholes, but they can travel anywhere they need to go. Warp lanes is the most tedious and slow way to travel around the galaxy, but it's also the most fun because there are pre-designated routes that you can travel along. And basically it allows you to predict where enemies will come from, and that allows you to actually set up defenses if you believe in defenses at all, which you shouldn't because they're trash. But the point is, you know where the enemy is going to come from, so you can kind of move your fleets to intercept a little bit. You know which side of your solar system they're going to come into. And then finally there's wormholes, and then wormholes is like one of the best techs because basically you build a wormhole, and then the wormhole can transport you to anywhere within the wormhole's radius, and wormholes have a gigantic radius, so you can just basically teleport over stuff into things, from all over the place if you have a wormhole station nearby. And they're a little bit vulnerable because the enemy can potentially fly into your empire and just blow up all your wormholes. But wormholes are also really cheap and super quick to build. They are weird because if you conquer someone's territory, then they erase your wormholes in that territory. So you extend your fleet all the way deep into their territory, and then the game's just like, all right, there's no wormholes here, so you're just, like, stranded. You have to, like, then leapfrog your wormholes into the territory that you conquered and already built wormholes into to get your fleet there in the first place. But that's because there's a mechanic. It's like the enemy has to grant you wormhole access for you to have wormholes in their galaxy, otherwise they just get destroyed. So basically when you conquer an enemy, you don't have wormhole access, and there's a little moment before everything hands over to you where, like, it's like, all right, you're at peace, and they still own all that territory, and so it destroys all your wormholes, and then it flips over to your control, so you have no wormholes, so you're just, like, your fleet's stranded for a little while. It's kind of a weird mechanic. But anyway, though, the problem is that it takes, like, a month for you to jump from solar system to solar system, but as long as you're sitting on the edge of the galaxy, in most cases, you just, like, jump. And so, like, what'll happen is that you'll get enemies, you'll see them coming in, and they're, like, coming in whatever direction. And if you try to intercept them from opposite directions, like if they're coming to if they're coming from the left, moving to the right, and you're coming from the right, moving to the left, you might be in the same solar system at one point. But while it takes them like a month to jump, it takes you more than a month to use your impulse drives to drive your fleet from one side of the solar system to the other side of the solar system. So by the time you get to the other side of the solar system, they've jumped and they've moved on to whatever it was that they were going to attack. And this creates a lot of problems because there will be cases where you see specifically like this is where the enemy is coming from, and you may want to stop them before they get to a planet because they're going to blow up all of your stuff in that solar system and on that planet. And you say to yourself, like, well, gee, I better go intercept. Like the AI especially, or people probably won't either, they won't go to a solar system if you get an advantage there due to having space stations. So they'll just skip ahead, like they just go to wherever it is that they're going to go. But once they get to like the middle of the solar system to start attacking stuff, they cannot escape. So you get into this problem where like, they're going to go where they're going and they're going to destroy whatever's there, but then you'll catch up to them. And it takes so long for you to jump, they can get to the middle of the solar system in 15 days, but it takes you 30 days to jump. So basically they'll get to the middle of the solar system, destroy everything, and then not have enough time to escape. But, it's really frustrating. So the point is, you can build these defensive structures, you can invest in technology that makes them better and better and better, but the defensive structures have no hope. They are completely futile at defending anything, and you can't support them either because of the way that interstellar travel works. There's also the problem with, because of the way that, like, if you attack anything, if you fly to the middle of a solar system, you're too slow to escape capture. There's really not a whole lot of strategy involved in moving your fleets around. So basically what everybody does is they just put all of their fleets together in a giant death blob, and they just move them to a solar system, blow up all the defenses because no one ever arrives in time to defend their defenses, and then the two fleets collide, and whoever has the largest fleet will win the battle, and that's kind of it. And if your fleets are sufficiently overwhelming, like if your numbers are big enough, then you actually flatten the other side without any losses. And so if you're like 30% bigger than them, you'll take basically no losses. It'll be such a bloodbath. You'll kill everything and suffer no losses whatsoever. So the bigger military really just kind of wins, hands down. It's pretty much a no-brainer thing. And the way to tell whether or not you're going to win a war is you just go into the menu and it'll tell you whether you're superior, equivalent, or inferior to your opponent. So if you look at that menu and it says that you're superior to your opponent, then you can just go in and mop the floor with them. They have no chance of stopping you, except for the very, 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 very early game when you might be superior because you built like one more ship than them, So this is kind of a problem, and it's been a problem for a good while, the whole death blob thing where the ships just go in and there's nothing you can do about them. But the devs are saying that they're working on fixing this problem. And the problem is that this totally unbalances the system where these tiny little empires right now, they build up a whole bunch of unity and then they just get these rewards for having all the unity. It sounds like what the devs are trying to do is they're trying to put a hard cap on the number of fleets that you can get, and they're trying to make it to where small fleets will do significantly more damage to large fleets. They're trying to increase the defender's advantage, which they really do need to do. But the problem is that they've worked really hard to make the game functional for tall players. Which tall, if you're not familiar with that slang, tall is a cute way, in my opinion, of saying passive and inefficient. But tall players are players who sit in like a single planet or a single solar system or whatever and just do nothing but wait for the tech timers to run down, And essentially the idea behind being tall is that you're just building up your one system really, really high, and that's your whole strategy. So Stellaris tries to give those players some functional ability, and if they start putting fleet caps on everything and they reduce the benefits of being active and spreading out and everything else like that, then it'll really kind of make it to where being passive is the best play style, and I'm a little bit fearful of that. But we'll see in February. The other thing that happened is, like, for the longest time they had this deal with like missiles, that they had to correct this where there's three different weapon types. You can get like lasers, kinetic weapons, and missiles. And for a long time, missiles were like the dumbest choice you could get. You could also get lasers, and a lot of people recommend you don't get lasers because like lasers are more effective against the ship's hull, but they do reduce damage to shields. And the funny thing is that shields were the most effective defense. So everybody always built shields, tons and tons of shields, which meant that if you had lasers, you were just doing like way less damage to everybody. So lasers were not very good. Kinetic weapons were the only weapons that made any sense whatsoever. And missiles, they didn't make sense because they had this problem where like missiles, you would fire off all your missiles, but the ships would all fire at like one ship. So they'd be like, that one, he's gonna die. And then when that ship died, the missiles that were en route would all vanish. So there was this huge problem with like overkill, where you would like waste all of your ammunition and then you'd have to reload and fire again, and you know, it was just stupid. So missiles like were the worst. They were guaranteed loss in every battle. Nobody used them. And then they changed it. They fixed that mechanic so that now if the missiles blow something up, they'll track to another target. They'll find a new target. And now missiles do tons of damage. They're super powerful. And some people feel like they're one of the best weapons in the game. They have a counter, but you have to build it specifically. So it's kind of it's a little bit more sophisticated. Now the meta is you can go kinetic for safety, or you can go missiles if you want to be really powerful, but maybe risk being countered. So it's a little bit better. Stellaris is moving towards being a better and better game, and so I'm really kind of hopeful for, you know, updates in the future. It's been fun so far. But one of the more interesting things about the game is at the end of it all, as you get to the end of the universe, they have what they call an Endgame Crisis. And the Endgame Crisis could be anything. It depends on what you researched at the time. It depends on what's going on. Some of them show up just by default if you haven't really done anything. Like if you get to the end of the universe and, you know, you've just been sitting around avoiding all the dangerous technology because it's dangerous. It's red. It tells you specifically it's dangerous, but it doesn't tell you why it's dangerous. You know, if you were afraid of that technology and you were the only one who researched it for some reason, then... you know, they have things that'll just show up by default. You get like extra galactical invaders, invaders from outside the galaxy, basically come in, and so they're like these massive threats that scale. I believe that they scale to the size of your empire. So even if you're like really huge and you're really powerful, if you're not careful, then at the end of the game, even though you've been like, you know, it's kind of funny, like you could sort of survive and be passive and get along with all your neighbors and be like, hey guys, how's it going? But then at the end you have this big galactic calamity that shows up, and everyone's in a panic, and they're just like, oh god, everything's on fire. I was really surprised by it the first time that I played through. I got to the end of the game, I was like, okay, I'm doing all right, you know, I'm getting by. I have up my military here, you know, about 80,000 fleet power. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, that's better than my next nearest neighbor. I'm doing okay. And then a giant hole opened up in space-time, and a bunch of things poured out of it. And I was just like, oh god, oh no. And the problem is that you have the blob thing, right? And so these space invaders come out, and they do the blob thing, where it's just sort of like, oh god, are they more powerful than me? They are. Oh god, oh god. So it was just like a total wipe, you know, they showed up. And it was funny, because I totally underestimated the severity of the problem. Like, the Helma opened up in one of my opponent's territory, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity for me to seize all of his planets. So I went in there, and while the AI was grappling with this Endgame Crisis, I was gobbling up his planets. And so, like, I claimed a bunch of his planets, because he was like, well, I have no military, and you're taking everything from me, so I surrender. And I was like, ha! I expanded my territory. Now I'll go and I'll deal with this crisis. And the crisis showed up, and it immediately just went to like vaporizing the planets that I had taken. Not like seizing them as a military asset, it just turned them into barren, like lifeless rocks with nothing on them. All dead, all gone. Everything, like, I was just like, oh, the Endgame Crisis is a big deal, huh? Gee. Maybe I shouldn't have wasted a bunch of resources on this pointless war with my neighbor, who was probably really on my side in this particular case. We had a mutual threat. Oh. Because I don't even think I was even at that bad of a diplomatic relationship with them. I think they didn't like me because I declared war on them once before. But yeah, that game was pretty funny because I think I was the dominant empire at the time. I had managed to kind of carve out my space, and I was doing okay. I wasn't really the most technologically advanced, but you know, I'd figured out the whole military thing at the very least. So I had a big stick, and I was willing to hit people with it. And so pretty soon the entire galaxy was just consumed, and it was really funny because there's also these ancient races, these fallen empires, and they're like so much stronger than everybody else. One of them, like during the Endgame Crisis, one of those empires got up off its lazy ass and then declared war on me, and I was like, are you kidding me? And so I just had to like agree to their demands. They're like, become my vassal, and I was like, all right, fine. You know, whatever, I'm a satellite to your powerful nation. And so I thought that maybe they would come help me out to, you know, save me against the Endgame Crisis, but they didn't do anything. They were so worthless. And they themselves were fine. The aliens came in to attack them, and or the horrible space abominations came in to attack them, and they were fine. They were just like, yeah, we'll defend against this. We got this. Our nation, our borders are secure. Good luck, Greg. Like, we're sure that you'll get that fleet up off the ground soon enough. And I tried, but I just watched as my entire galactic nation, my sprawling empire crumbled under the weight of this horrible thing. By this point, I'm good enough at the game that I can survive the Endgame Crisis. It just took me totally by surprise the first time. It was my first playthrough. I had no idea what to expect. So yeah, I've seen a couple of different ones. There's another one where like an ancient AI wakes up and decides to wipe out all of the living creatures. There's another one where like there's a couple of different ones. I haven't seen them all, but I've seen a couple of them. And so yeah, that's sort of a fun element. I feel like the game, like, it may declare you the winner for Conquest or whatever like that early on, and I feel like if you've won the game, you probably have enough resources that you can survive the endgame conflict, so it's probably fair for it to say that you've won. But I feel like the game's not over until the Endgame Crisis shows up, because then you have to fight it off, and it's always kind of a slog. No matter how good your empire is, it tends to be, there's just a lot to do when the Endgame Crisis shows up. There's a lot of destruction, and they kind of hit with a lot of force. So yeah, it's a fun game. I enjoy it. People seem a lot more willing to play it. A lot more people seem into it, which means that they have done a reasonable job with making it accessible to people who aren't as into really complex mechanics. Another friend of mine says that he kind of dislikes it because for a grand strategy game, it's fairly simplistic. And in fairness, he is right. It is fairly simple in nature. I mean, it's there's a lot of different things you can do, a lot of different things you can customize, but the general game plan is fairly straightforward. It just depends on the way you set up your empire. Like, whatever you designed your empire to do, that's what you set out to do for pretty much the entire game. And the game does change depending on how you design your empire, but for the most part, it's kind of like fairly straightforward. But I don't think that I've seen a game that so many other people have. Like, we proposed this for a game night one night, and like a bunch of people had it, and so we were able to actually play it. So yeah, they're at least achieving that. I think we've also done Civ 5, but I don't know. A lot of people either seem to tolerate Civ 5 or hate Civ 5, whereas Stellaris, it's kind of like people sort of are either tolerating Stellaris or they sort of enjoy it, was more my impression. And I personally sort of enjoy it. So, yes, I suppose that's it. Stellaris, been playing Stellaris. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.